Very excited.
Yeah.
All right.
Only better place to be made.
I'd like to call this regular meeting of the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission meeting on this Thursday, February 27th, to order. And first thing would be the roll call. Have we taken roll call?
We could, certainly. Commission Director,
Oh, I guess we got it all written down, don't we?
okay.
So you'll have to excuse me, this is my first as chairman here for the regular meeting, so trying to remember exactly, well, what we did. So we do have a chance, did anybody not get a chance to sign this sheet that's here tonight?
You can pass it down this way if you would mind, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, so that should satisfy roll call. When we get that sheet, and then looking for a motion for approval of the agenda.
Move the agenda be approved.
Second.
Okay, any discussions? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Say
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. Next would be to open things up for any public comment. Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and move on to the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Anything that anybody would like to have pulled?
I'll move the consent agenda.
Have a motion?
I'll second it.
Seconded? All those in favor of approving consent? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Consent agenda has passed. Okay. So now we have, next, number 6 is reports from our executive director. Mark?
Yes,
wanna-
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep things brief this evening, but what I did include in the packet was our preliminary 2019 P&L actual for you to take a look at. Things to point out is that we are looking at a revenue surplus of $189,677.10 for 2019. And what this P&L does not reflect is the budgeted $200,000 return to the cities that was approved in the budget. And so we have an agenda item later regarding the distribution and approval of the return for 2019. I also handed out an alternate look at the P&L by city. I apologize for the small print, but it does give you and I can email this as well to you. It does give a look of revenue and expenses by city, and it also shows the overhead costs of the commission office as well. Also included in the packet is the letter that we received from CenturyLink regarding their official decision to turn down their Prism TV product. We'll probably cover some of that during our legal report, so if you have any questions regarding that, we'll make those available at that time. I did want to give you a brief update as well in regards to another agenda item that we had worked on with the executive committee, which is our lease. We have all the numbers that we wanted to look at to weigh our options regarding our lease, which, as you may know, is through August of this year. And so we finally have received all the data that we were looking at, and so we're weighing our options right now. My hope is that we'll have a recommendation for the executive committee within the next couple weeks, and then at the executive committee, we'll discuss that. I encourage you to attend that meeting as well. So then that way we can have it teed up for the full commission meeting in April. The chair and I met with staff recently to continue the discussion around strategic planning, and we also have an agenda item regarding that tonight. But what I can tell you about that meeting is that we were able to distill the information down into 3 action items for this year, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. That's about it. I did want to mention one event that's coming up on Thursday, March 1st. It's the MACTA Day at the Capitol event. It's the annual event where community media administrators and executive directors and staff get a chance to have discussions and interviews with our state legislators. The event starts at 9 a.m. at the League of Minnesota Cities, and we're expecting Representative Stevenson to be there, as well as a representative from Senator Smith's office to discuss her recent sign-on to the Protecting Community Television Act. And we also have a call in to the new broadband director for the state. Can't think of her name right now, sorry. But she's recently taken on that role. And we're also potentially going to speak with someone from Attorney General Ellison's office regarding the CenturyLink and Comcast settlement. So the morning session at the League will be pretty informative, 9 to 11, and then we'll break for lunch and go over to the Capitol. So registration is on the mactamn.org website. Let me know if you have any trouble registering and if you want to attend, and I'll make sure you get signed up. It's a week from today, rather. And I'll do it for my report. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for the executive director? Seeing none, we'll move on to legal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening.
Good evening.
We have 3 things to report on tonight. First is the Protecting Community Television Act. That is a new piece of legislation that's been introduced in the House and the Senate in Washington, and it would essentially reverse the FCC's decision that we're appealing right now that impacts franchise fees. And so we've been working diligently here with MACTA, the League of Minnesota Cities, and the national organizations on getting support for that act. One of the things that we've done is we put together a resolution for cable commissions and cities to pass it to show their support. We think there should be bipartisan support for this bill because it would basically be a status quo bill. It would be having franchise fees calculated exactly the same way they've been calculated for the last 35 years. And we just put that together this week, and we'll bring that forward to your executive committee to consider, and if they so choose, then it would come to the full commission the following month. Just so you know, we've shared that nationally now, and I was just asked by the National League of Cities if they could share it with their membership. So we think it's going to be used in kind of far and wide at this point, which is good news. The Comcast franchise fee review, just to remind you that we had the franchise fee review done by Ashpaw Skulko. They reviewed 3 years of Comcast franchise fees payments to the commission, and they found an underpayment. After we found that underpayment, we asked Comcast to pay the underpayment or provide written reasons why they disagree with the report that our consultant made. They chose to provide a written response. After that, we set up a conference call with both Ashpaw Skulko and Comcast to go over both of their positions. And now we're going to be meeting with Comcast. I'll be meeting with Comcast to see if there's a way that we can resolve the differences between the two different sides. So I have a meeting scheduled with Comcast representatives next week, and we'll give you an update at the executive committee and hopefully again at the next full commission meeting. And finally, our appeal of the FCC's cable franchising order is still moving forward. We have an oral argument scheduled for the motion to stay that we made, and that's scheduled for early March. And then the briefing, primary briefing will happen after that. We don't have a briefing schedule yet. Briefing's been suspended until after the stay motion's heard. But we expect it to be done in the second quarter of 2020, and then, we'll have more information on when the oral argument is and when we can expect a decision ultimately out of the Sixth Circuit later this year. And that's my report. I'd be happy to answer questions.
So Mike, I saw the sample resolution that you sent out that cities.
Oh, good.
So, and I know we're going to talk about that, but just so I understand, so if a city does create that resolution, what impact does it have, and where does it go beyond the city then to make any impact somewhere else?
So if our member cities, and we'll get into this as we go along here, but if your city decides to pass a resolution like that, then I would make sure to get it to Mark first, and then it should be given to the League of Minnesota Cities and MACTA.
Okay.
And then the national associations that we work with, we would share it with them too. So we can, the way I would use it here is primarily with our own Minnesota delegation to make sure that, we're getting Democrat and Republican support for that piece of legislation.
Okay.
So what's actually the timing of that if we were to need to get that back in?
There's no timetable. It's not something that has to be done tonight, for example.
Right, okay.
It's not before the body, it wasn't on the agenda, so.
Right.
We haven't had time to socialize it yet, so we'll talk about it at the executive committee meeting and then go forward.
Thank you. Oh,
Mike, what is the magnitude of the difference in the franchise fees that, between Comcast and what the consultant has identified?
It's significant. It's over $100,000 difference.
all right, any other questions for legal? Seeing none, we will move on to item 7, unfinished business and the strategic planning and the gaps. You want me to talk about that? So we had our strategic planning, and we had got everybody together and did some brainstorming, and then followed up and worked out some different objectives and so forth. The GAPS program is a goals achievement planning system, and it basically you get different objectives that you're looking to accomplish, and it gives you the opportunity to put in a measurement target and actions and so forth. But so as a result, we did change the focus. It was actually to not confuse it with the JPA and the mission of the commission. We did change the focus, and that became the focus of the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission shall be to manage the cable franchise and provide videos that communicate information, activities, and entertainment to member cities and provide video production services to organizations external to the member cities for a profit. And that was one of the things that we put in as an objective, is to start looking more for ways that we can bring in more revenue and potentially working with private organizations and such to actually get paid for it versus, which would be outside the franchise. So I guess in terms of going into depth, whether you kind of read this or not, we basically broke objectives up into community, customer, financial, and operational process, and then training, learning, and growth. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 13. Have 14 different objectives, and I don't necessarily plan to go through every one of those here tonight, but everybody has their, maybe had a chance to look at some of those in the packet. And so basically what those would be is were our, you know, the objectives for the year, and some of them are longer than a year. But, and then as we move forward through the year, we will work on fine tuning some of the measures, the targets, and then obviously developing the action items and how to achieve the objectives. So I guess what I'll ask is, at this point, as opposed to, unless people would want me to go through each one of these, whether you've had a chance to just kind of look over them and have any questions on the objectives that are showing in the first column there.
Dave,
Mr. Tubby?
in the past, we've had a number of discussions about doing more or less commercial work with our staff and our equipment.
Right.
And each time it was defeated, I think, because we did not want to be in a position of competing with commercial interests. So I'm wondering what may have changed in order to bring back that thinking about.
Well,
Trying
you can chime in too, but I think what's actually changed is, you know, we're in a different financial environment right now also. You know, we're seeing an erosion of revenues and so forth from the franchising. We're seeing, you know, people moving over to, you know, the streaming, so they're not actually paying the cable and so forth. Different litigation and things of that are going on right now that could in fact cause revenue to go down. So one of the things that we're looking at is what kind of things can we do to potentially increase revenues or maintain revenues, okay? And one of those things definitely was doing work for other organizations for a fee, okay? And whether, in some cases, whether that be a nonprofit, whether that be a company, you know, like Renewal for Anderson or 3M or something of that nature. But we've clearly stated that we won't do that work for those external organizations at the demise or priority over, you know, doing the work for the cities. So the work we would doing right now for the cities takes priority.
Well, I've always agreed that I think it's a relatively sensible income stream, a revenue stream, but I think there's also a slippery slope there that you need to be cautious of.
Sure.
When you enter into when you have a governmental unit like we are entering into competition with the private sector. So I would just caution that we be cognizant of that fact.
You bet. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that, there's certainly the financial piece, but then it does tie into community engagement, the potential of community engagement, where, for example, partnering with nonprofits in the community, we can offer a service, yes, but then we can also offer consultative work and not just doing a one video kind of project, but partnering with that nonprofit to help them grow their membership, grow their stakeholders, and you know, and leverage what we do best to help them and ultimately help the community. We also have, you know, assets that we have very high quality assets. We have a studio currently that sits idle. And so we'd like to get that production space working when it's sitting idle. So there's a lot of different factors that have made us revisit that.
Well, I agree that within the or the public sphere, it makes perfect sense. I'm just cautious about branching out into the commercial world. So,
All right. Any other discussions on the gaps? It's
Mr. Chair.
intended to be somewhat of a fluid document, too. It's
Mr.
not-
Chair, I was wondering if you might consider changing some wording around. Since we're a municipal entity, I was a little uncomfortable with the wording of for-profit. And I understand what you're doing, but maybe for hire instead of for profit?
Okay. All right. Great.
As we move some of our initiatives forward this year, one thing that I'll bring up at our next executive committee meeting is the potential of putting together a couple different subcommittees of 2 people and myself. One being potentially around strategic planning to help keep that moving forward, and then the other, I'd like the board's assistance with human resources planning, and all that encompasses too. There's a lot going on in that area of the organization. So
Sure.
that's something that we'll talk about then
Okay.
as well.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
With regard to the strategic planning, is that a facilitated process similar to what some of the cities do with regard to bringing in a consultant and you facilitate a process with the executive board and the staff, or is that mostly done sort of in-house?
Well, we discussed actually having, paying somebody to do that and decided that it wasn't necessarily that large a project. So we did use, do it internally and actually use a gap system that I have used before.
And then,
So I acted as a facilitator.
I see. And then is this, because it's a public entity, is this document, once it's reviewed by the attorney and approved by the executive committee, is it published for the public to review someplace?
Sure. Yes.
Where-
This is the first year we're using it.
Okay.
So.
Where does
so-
that get published? Any ideas?
Well, it'd be in the, obviously, this is
agenda.
it's in the agenda, that's a public document.
But
And then it'll be along with the other documents with the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission.
Currently, our official documents are on our website. That was,
Website.
yeah.
And so this is a final document? The
We're not-
document that's in the agenda is a final document?
The strategic planning document? No, it's
Mm-hmm. Okay.
work in
That
progress.
was my question, is once it's finalized.
Yeah.
So it's been through all the filters, it's been through the eyes of the attorney, it gets published then on the website?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, anything else on that? Okay. We'll go on to new business. So item A is the return to cities. Mark, did you want to go through where we're at
Sure.
with that?
Hopefully you received the revised agenda. Typically, this process has been done in the past in March, but we did move our meetings around this year, and so we're able to bring this item to you earlier in the year. Going back to the P&L review in my report, and you saw that we had a surplus for 2019. At the executive committee meeting in January, the executive committee voted to return the full amount of $200,000 to the city of Woodbury and Cottage Grove, and take the additional $10,000 out of reserve to make that whole for 2019. So the executive committee approved the recommendation to the full commission to approve a distributed amount of $133,333.33, or 2/3 of the return to Woodbury and 1/3 at $66,666.67 respectively to the city of Cottage Grove. This is a similar breakdown from what we did, actually it's the exact same breakdown as last year, 2018. Although in 2018 we had budgeted $300,000 and 2019 is $200,000. That's the difference there. And so the action requested, the executive committee recommends the approval of the 2019 budgeted return of $200,000 to be distributed to the cities of Woodbury and Cottage Grove in the amount of $133,333.33 and $66,666.67 respectively.
Okay. Are there any questions associated with that?
And I'll just chime in to say, this is a reminder that, so for next year, for this year's budget, no money has been earmarked ahead of time. So this is the last year of that, having it factored into the budget and distributed. Going forward, it's going to be the return of value and what our surplus is. So everybody's on
It
board with
stands
that?
as of today, that's how it
Right.
stands, yeah.
And part of that surplus, quote unquote, is actually the additional money we have in reserves, more than the 9 months that we previously
We
had.
need, right.
Or 6 months, excuse me.
Right, based on our policy with that.
Right.
Yep.
So,
And I'll add, Mr. Chair, I know we did approve the full amount of taking it out of the reserves. I am having a little bit second thoughts on that, just because of that. I'm not sure exactly over the year we've got a budget, but again, how things are gonna shake out. And would we just be better off if we have the 189,000, that is the actual budget amount that's over, just splitting that with the current, 2/3, 1/3, and sending that to the cities versus the whole amount? And then keeping that 10,000 reserve in your budget for unanticipated things for next year.
well, I think as we move forward, I mean, that was a definite concern, even when we were talking about
know.
the reserve and what level the reserve should be at and what the future held. And, if all of a sudden we lost significant funding, one way or another, what means would we have for continuance of the commission and so forth. So, I think a lot will be determined too after we get this Comcast contract renewed and have a little more understanding what the future's gonna hold. And
So we're not making that decision at distribution tonight, so we're
We
not
are.
doing that? Or we are?
We are making.
Okay, that's why I
yes.
wanted to kind of bring that up.
Yes,
We're actually over in our reserves now anyway.
Right.
By considerable amount, so the 10,000, whatever difference, it's not gonna put them on.
I know, we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
I'm saying having second thoughts now.
and the Comcast, the underpayment, that's out there for us as well, coming back in, so.
Yeah, but until that comes in, I don't know if we can count that.
Yeah,
But
right, right.
Our lawyer's gonna go get that, I'm sure he's gonna get that for us.
I think for this year, what we're looking at doing is, in my opinion, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that will be okay. But as Rob mentioned that, we're not going to necessarily budget a certain amount.
Right, I understand that,
to
next
return
going
to
on.
cities, and
Right.
and it'll be a little bit more of a, whatever we have an over or under, and calculate it at the end of the year, once we complete the year, and then decide what amount of money can be returned to the city, so. And that's, I believe, is everybody's understanding from our past meetings and things like that?
Yeah, it's,
Especially with setting the budget, yes, right,
Right.
in the budget discussion, so.
All right. All right, very good, thank you. Any other discussion on that?
So
Yeah.
I have a question. It says that the amounts are based upon a draft ROV in the 2016 Front Range Report. I'm new, so I wasn't around it whenever that budgetary cycle was put in. So I guess, was the criteria to determine how to divide this surplus done at the time of the budgeting, or was this something that was done more recently?
Well, like the name states, it's return of value. So basically what the conceptual thing was is how much value does each city receive, okay? So, there's some years where like council chambers are redone, okay? So that's a certain amount of money spent for that city, okay? And then there's other things that get done. So it was saying, well, if one city got all this money for, redoing a council chambers, should you still split up money evenly in a sense at the end? So the question was no, we should calculate, what that value that the cities receive, okay? So and I won't go deep into the calculations, but at the end of the year, it says, okay, we have this much of let's say we have this much of a, let's say profit or money left over because we improved upon what we were going to do in the budget or something, because we always try to budget to a non-profit type of deal, okay? So, and then we take a look at, well, now how do we split that money up, okay? Number one, the obvious thing is that we're splitting things to the ratio of subscribers in each of the cities, okay? That's one of the things. Then we're also looking at what kind of value that each city received and essentially discount that or modify that based on that. And, we have this all laid out in terms of the calculation that you'd be able to take a closer look at whenever you'd wish.
Yeah. To add a little historical context to previous to 2018, from 2017 and back, all the returns were based on a percentage of income. So whatever the percentage of income was the return back to the city. So for the city of Newport, if it was 10%, then they'd get 10% back. The joint powers was revised in 2016, and that's where the consultant was brought in, Front Range. And there were, a number of things changed, weighted voting, for example. And then there was an understanding to continue that historical way of distributing the money back for 2 years after that point, which ended in 2017. And so 2018 and 2019, we've been under this new model.
If you want to get into it deeper, we can schedule some time with Mark and so forth.
I just might, yeah.
Okay.
That's great, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Justin.
Thank you. I heard that this is the last year, meaning this previous year is the last year that we're going to use this current budget model. So I'm curious what the new budget model looks like. Without getting into the deep end of the pool, my primary question is, do the member cities have a budget that they are expected to utilize? And then will they be able to measure utilization of that budget so that at the end of the year, they can effectively understand my budgetary allotment was, for sake of argument, $100,000. I used $60,000 of that in services, equipment, production, whatever the case might be. Therefore, I can expect a check back for $40,000. Is that how this is going to work, or what exactly is the new model?
You want me to take it, or you want? So basically and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but there's really not necessarily any absolute budget to like production or stories or things like that. Where there was a definite budget is if we're going to redo a capital equipment. So we definitely have a capital equipment saying we're going to redo this chamber, okay, for $350,000 or whatever, okay? So now, one thing we've started to do to give information both back to the cities and potentially if we do work for hire, okay, with external organizations, is actually do some more finite cost accounting, kind of take different activities. Before there was really no accounting for the people's time and saying this is specifically for this city, this is specifically for this city, okay, we've now changed that. Okay, so we're doing that cost accounting, so we have much better detail to how much services are being rendered for particular cities, okay? And I think we have some, in the plans, we say, well, we've got these meetings in Cottage Grove, we've got these meetings in this city, we've got these meetings in this city, and so those things we're going to cover. We don't really go to the level, and correct me if I'm wrong, unless we've changed this, of saying, okay, it's going to be this much in services, in those kind of resources, and if you don't use it, you get something back. No, okay? So basically, it says, in the end, if we beat the budget, okay, and we have a positive bottom line, then that money will be dispersed back to the cities based on their subscriber ratio and also what kind of like capital equipment and things of that nature that they received. Okay? And so the thing that changed in the budget, besides breaking some things out to the member cities more, okay, in terms of services and such, it is that the return of money to the cities is being brought underneath the budget or the essentially the net income or
Bottom line,
loss
yeah.
line, right?
Is that,
Yeah.
is that right?
Well, yes, and I want to add to that, essentially, we're looking at four components. You have your revenue, which is easily identifiable. You have your capital expenditures that we budget year to year, that's easily identifiable per project. Where we have the overhead, which, pays for the office and my salary, for example, easily identifiable. What we haven't implemented yet is actually two more things. We haven't implemented how do we look at depreciation of equipment and how is that spread out over time and how does that impact each city? And then the production hours per employee, which since the start of this year, we've been gathering more detail about how many specific hours per project. Now, each project is unique to itself. There's a lot of different variables involved in production. So that's more difficult to pin down to say, well, we're going to do 10 PSAs and 15 short segments and one long form, film, in-depth film. It's all those have very different requirements to do very well at the level that I expect. So that's been more difficult to pin down. And then just determining, and the treasurer, Commissioner Bloom and I just recently had a conversation about depreciation and how that's going to affect. So those are the final two things that we're pinning down. And then at that point, we'll be able to actually say, okay, here's the revenue, and this is how the expenses get applied towards that revenue.
Will cities be able to know within a reasonable amount one way or the other, over the course of an entire year's time, what they're spending on usage, equipment, et cetera, versus what their start of the year allocation was, and then factor an approximation of what they may be seeing as a return at the end of the
Yeah,
year?
we can do that. Certainly, take monthly looks at it, but a good way for us to look at things is quarterly, because that's how we receive our
Sure.
revenue, is on a
Sure.
quarterly basis. So then we're able to look at all the numbers in full on a quarterly basis. And, we've been doing that, quarterly reports, but the detail's even going to get better, so, yeah.
But we haven't really throttled back necessarily on anybody, right? We haven't necessarily come back and said, well, no, you can't do that.
No, what has happened is, and it's been something that I've implemented, I'm just finished my third year here. And so what I saw after my first year was that our internal workflow didn't represent the new joint powers agreement. It was kind of out of whack. And so at that time, 2017 and even a lot of 2018, a lot of the production was being done by Cottage Grove and less for the city of Woodbury. And so what I've done is change the workflow so that way Woodbury is getting 2/3 of the production, and Cottage Grove is getting 1/3 of the production. That's how we've allocated.
But we never really refused anything from Woodbury, did we?
As far as I know, we haven't refused anything, no, it's
So that's
just,
kind of why I'm kind of curious in some ways of where all of this is coming from, of having to stay within in a sense, the cities have to stay within a budget of what they do. I mean, we tend to bring things up and we say, well, do we have the resources for that or not? But, it's, to my knowledge, we're not saying, Cottage Grove, you have this budget of resources, Woodbury, you have this budget of resources. If we kind of come in and we have to start saying a lot that, hey, we don't have the resources, then that's where, in a sense, some of that, the JPA and the ratio of subscriber base, the 67-32, that's where that kind of then would play in somewhat from a priority. If we have limited resources, then, maybe, obviously Woodbury would end up, getting the long straw to be able to have something done where Cottage Grove or Newport or St. Paul Park may not. But we're clearly trying to do whatever any of the cities want. And if we're saying, well, we're constantly hitting up against that limitation, then maybe we need to get some more resources to be able to produce more. It's not like the city is necessarily paying anything for these production services. It's coming through the benefit of the franchise and the fact that legislation a long time ago said we're gonna, make people pay for the right-of-way where the cable's running. And so this money was coming in for local programming. And to some extent, because of the money coming in, the commission has been able to do other things, like buy other equipment for the cities and do some of those other things, where I think the cities have been become used to having things that probably weren't necessarily intended to be part of the original franchise benefits, years ago. So.
one additional thing, I don't want to get further out there, but this is, I think, impacting maybe the perspective from Cottage Grove is the strategic planning process. A year ago this time, we were, the staff internally, ready to move forward with work for hire. Part of retooling the workflow was, yes, to do more for our member cities that reflected the JPA, but also work us more collaboratively and also develop a pipeline that made sense. So we could bring in an external project, drop it into the pipeline, and it would just flow through the pipeline and have as much attention to it as it needs. So we were already doing all that behind the scenes, getting ready for that. I brought a new brand potential, a new logo potential to the commission. And then thankfully, with Councilmember Date's help, there was a suggestion to even broaden that out into a much more elaborate strategic planning, something that the organization hasn't done in 35 years. So it felt like it was a good time to do that. So internally, the communications with the staff and the cities have been, we're moving in this direction, but then we've really had to start, and now we're working through the much broader consensus-building strategic planning process. So it's been a little delayed. So I think maybe that's where maybe the city, at least the communications staff, might feel like they're waiting for us to do other things too. And there's maybe a hesitation there. And that's something I can help kind of communicate that back to Scott.
Well, there was a lot of information there, but really, I'm just trying to figure out how the accounting works, that's all. I mean, it's pretty fundamental. I mean, you start with a budgeted number, and you spend your resources, and then whatever's left, you get back or you don't. I mean, you're giving a check back tonight for $66,000 to the city, so that's all I'm trying to do, is figure out how that works.
You could probably tell I'm passionate about what I do, so I could go on and on about it. And
Yeah, and I'll come down and we'll visit, privately, so I can learn a little bit more about it. But that's really the point, is when I look at the P&L, it appears as though there should be a typical P&L flow-through, revenue minus expenses equals profit.
There's a budget, okay, but the revenue's coming in from individuals in the cities. There's no revenue coming in from the city itself.
Well, then, what's the point? I mean, if you want to have that argument tonight, we'll have it, but then the city should do all of its production itself and not be part of the body. I mean, that's
Well,
a
that may be a
silly thing to
decision.
say.
That may be a decision that happens,
Yes.
okay?
Let's drop it.
And then,
Let's drop it.
and there's other cities that'll be less,
Let's drop it, Dave.
yeah. Mr. Tawby, do you have a question?
Thank you. From a historical perspective, and I go all the way back to the very first meeting of this commission, I can't remember any discussions along the way about this concept of allocating budget for specific jurisdictions. Not that it's necessarily a bad idea, but I don't think the commission has ever really done that, at least not on the surface where it's visible. The other question that I could use some clarification on involves around Mr. Olson's initial query about the accounting for and you addressed from the chair the concept of it almost sounded like you were talking about reducing the return to the particular city based upon whether or not they had had significant capital improvements during that yearly budget. And again, historically, I don't remember that the capital improvements were always sort of planned years in advance on a sort of a rotating basis. And it was just something that the commission took care of and didn't necessarily, the charges for that didn't go back to the specific jurisdiction. So I'm wondering if I misunderstood that part of the discussion, or if, for example, $300,000 was spent upgrading this particular council chamber, whether or not that would factor into the overage of the budgetary return. In which case, it would eliminate the return for that particular city in that particular year. Did I misunderstand that?
No, and we are leveling off the capital equipment. We're looking at it over a 5-year period. So it gets smooth, so it doesn't have as much impact in any one individual year. To answer your question about in the past, there was a time when Fran, we had, there was a lot of money just going into reserves, okay? And so I believe it was just an arbitrary saying, okay, we'll return this amount of money to the cities, okay? And then in 2017, when we start having more discussions about the return of value to the cities, okay, then, we got into more of the starting to calculate it and starting to say, well, how much should it be and things of that nature, and that's kind of when it changed. I mean, there was obviously one point where, when the commission actually started, that Cottage Grove was about twice the size of Woodbury, whereas now, Woodbury's almost twice the size as Cottage Grove is and so forth. So, that's how things change over time. And obviously with the climate, of the cable climate and things like that, the franchise and revenues and things like that, I don't believe, we've had discussions that we can't just arbitrarily say, let's give this money back to the cities. So, and that's brought out in the JPA also. It's got a little deeper than what it probably intended for it to go tonight, but.
It's good conversation.
So is there any other questions? Okay, let's see where we at now. Okay, so item B on new business is the Harrington, Langer and Associates financial audit.
We need to vote on the first one.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, okay. So the return to cities, and we designated,
There's a motion on the floor, or action requested, I should say.
Can I say
There-
so moved, or do you want me to reread it?
Can we read it?
Okay.
Yeah.
I will move that we approve the executive committee recommendation of the 2019 budgeted return of $200,000 to be distributed to the city of Woodbury in the amount of $133,333.33, and to the city of Cottage Grove in the amount of $66,666.67.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Same sign. Okay, the motion has passed. Okay, now we can move on to item B in new business. Thank you. In the Harrington, Langer and Associates financial audit. Who's going to talk about that?
Yep, we received an engagement letter from Harrington, Langer and Associates to conduct the 2019 fiscal audit. We've been working with them now. I think this will be the 7th year. We have talked as a commission about putting that work out for bid. However, we decided to continue with the firm rather, for this year because of the Hero Center project. That was funding that came out of our reserves, and Harrington, Langer and Associates were notified of that expenditure last year, that it would be earmarked for this year. And so just for continuity's sake, the recommendation is to contract with them for 2019, and then potentially, if the commissioner would like to see other bids for 2020, we could do that in the fall. They have increased over the years their services about $250 every year. So the engagement letter says that the fee will not exceed $8,500 for this audit, and it's all inclusive. Any questions regarding the engagement letter?
Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the proposal from Harrington Langer and Associates for doing our auditing this year.
I would so move.
Second?
A motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right. We're down to number 9, commission comments and requests. Do we have any commission comments or requests?
Good to see Commission Director Jerry Tobby this evening. It's been a while.
Aye.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing none, I guess item 10 is
Move to adjourn.
a motion and a second to adjourn. This meeting is adjourned.